Welcome to Crime Line. I'm David. Tonight, we confront one of the most disturbing and infamous figures in the annals of American crime, Ted Bundy. He was handsome, intelligent, and chillingly charismatic. A man who shattered the very image of what a monster could look like. For years during the 1970s, he moved across the United States like a phantom, leaving a trail of terror and a string of unsolved disappearances and brutal murders. Bundy was a master manipulator, luring his victims, primarily young women, with elaborate ruses that preyed on their kindness and trust. His methods were as varied as they were cruel, and his ability to evade capture, even escaping custody twice, added to his terrifying legend. He confessed to at least 30 murders, but the true number of lives he destroyed may never be known. Join us on Crime Line as we delve into the dark psyche of Ted Bundy. From his seemingly normal upbringing to his reign of terror across multiple states, the desperate manhunts, his sensational trials, and the haunting legacy he left behind. This is a journey into the heart of darkness, exploring how such evil could exist behind such a charming facade. Theodore Ted Bundy remains one of the most infamous and chilling figures in the annals of American crime. A serial killer whose name became synonymous with predatory evil masked by a veneer of charm and intelligence. Active primarily throughout the 1970s, Bundy's reign of terror spanned multiple states, leaving a trail of 30 confessed homicides, though the true number of his victims is widely suspected to be significantly higher. His ability to elude capture for so long, his two daring escapes from custody, and the shocking dichotomy between his handsome, articulate public persona and the gruesome nature of his crimes cemented his notoriety. Bundy's victims were predominantly young women and girls, often college students, whom he lured with elaborate ruses, such as feigning injury or impersonating authority figures. Once he had gained their trust or isolated them, he would overpower, abduct, and subject them to horrific sexual assault and murder. His methods were brutal, and he often disposed of his victims in remote, wooded areas, sometimes returning to the sites for further post-mortem defilement. The geographical scope of his confirmed crimes included Washington, Oregon, Utah, Colorado, Idaho, and Florida, creating a complex and challenging investigative landscape for law enforcement agencies that, at the time, were less equipped for interstate data sharing and criminal profiling than they are today. The Bundy case had a profound impact on public consciousness and the study of criminal psychology. He defied the stereotypical image of a monstrous killer. He was educated, having studied law, well-spoken, and considered physically attractive by many. This mask of sanity, as it's often termed in psychopathy, made his crimes all the more terrifying, as it highlighted the fact that such profound evil could lurk behind a deceptive facade of normalcy. His televised trial in Florida, where he at times participated in his own defense, further exposed the public to his manipulative charisma. Ted Bundy's story forced a reevaluation of how serial predators operate and became a pivotal case study in understanding psychopathy, sexual sadism, and the complex motivations of those who commit repetitive, heinous acts of violence, leaving a dark and lasting legacy on American criminal justice. One of the most disturbing and endlessly analyzed aspects of Ted Bundy's predatory career was his remarkable ability to project an image of normalcy, intelligence, and even charm, a facade that starkly contrasted with the monstrous nature of his crimes. This mask of sanity, as it's often called in discussions of psychopathy, was not only a key component of his modus operandi, but also a significant reason why he was able to evade capture for so long, and why his case continues to horrify and fascinate. Bundy was, by all outward appearances, an individual who should have been trustworthy and non-threatening. He was widely described as handsome, articulate, and intelligent. He had attended university, studied psychology, and was even a law student for a time. He had worked on political campaigns and volunteered at a suicide crisis hotline, actions that would typically suggest a civic-minded and empathetic individual. This cultivated persona was a deadly tool. His conventional good looks and glib charm allowed him to approach young women in public places without immediately arousing suspicion. He could engage them in conversation, appear vulnerable or in need of assistance, and disarm their natural caution. Victims often described their assailant, later identified as Bundy, as polite, well-spoken, and attractive, traits that made his subsequent betrayal and violence all the more shocking. This ability to inspire trust was crucial to luring his victims into situations where he could overpower them. The stark dichotomy between Bundy's outward presentation and his hidden life of sadistic violence made him a particularly terrifying figure. He embodied the killer next door archetype, challenging societal assumptions about what a serial murderer looked like or how they behaved. This deceptive normalcy also played a role in the initial difficulties investigators faced. It was hard for some to believe that such a clean-cut, educated man could be responsible for such heinous acts. Even during his trials, particularly the highly publicized Florida trial, which was televised, Bundy's courtroom antics and attempts to charm the media, and even the judge, showcased his manipulative abilities. The chilling reality that someone so seemingly normal could harbor such profound depravity contributed significantly to the public's macabre fascination with Bundy and served as a grim lesson in the deceptive nature of psychopathy. Ted Bundy's success in abducting so many young women over several years can be largely attributed to his sophisticated, cunning, and highly manipulative methods of luring his victims. He did not typically resort to brute force in the initial encounter. Instead, he preyed on their empathy, sense of civic duty, or their deference to authority figures. His good looks and articulate speech were instrumental in these deceptions, allowing him to appear non-threatening and even pitiable or respectable. One of Bundy's most frequently used ruses was feigning injury or disability. He would often appear in public places, such as college campuses, shopping malls, or beaches, with his arm in a sling or a cast on his leg, sometimes struggling with books or packages. He would then approach a young woman and politely ask for her assistance in carrying items to his car or help him with a minor task. This tactic exploited the natural human instinct to help someone perceived as injured or in distress. Once the victim was near his vehicle, often a Volkswagen Beetle, which he had modified to facilitate abductions, removing the inside passenger door handle, he would strike, quickly overpowering and subduing her. Another common method involved impersonation. Bundy would pose as an authority figure, most notably a police officer or sometimes a fire inspector. He would approach a potential victim, perhaps inform her that her car had been broken into or that there was a safety concern, and then request that she accompany him to his vehicle or a more secluded area. In a society where people are generally conditioned to cooperate with law enforcement, this guise was highly effective in gaining compliance without raising immediate alarm. Survivor Carol Darange, for example, was lured when Bundy, identifying himself as Officer Roseland, told her someone had attempted to break into her car. Bundy was adaptable and would vary his approach. He was known to engage potential victims in charming conversation, using his intelligence and education to build rapport before attempting to isolate them. These methods were particularly insidious because they targeted the victims' better natures, their willingness to help, their respect for authority, or simply their politeness. The psychological manipulation involved was profound, creating a scenario where the victim willingly walked into a trap, only realizing the true danger when it was too late. This ability to seamlessly blend in, create a convincing pretext, and exploit societal norms of behavior was a hallmark of Bundy's predatory intelligence. Ted Bundy's light brown, often described as tan, 1968 Volkswagen Beetle became an infamous and integral part of his criminal legacy, serving not just as transportation but as a meticulously prepared trap for his unsuspecting victims. The choice of a VW Beetle was, in itself, disarming. It was a common, unassuming, and somewhat friendly-looking car, unlikely to arouse immediate suspicion or fear. unlike a more overtly threatening vehicle. This innocuous appearance was crucial to Bundy's ability to approach and interact with young women in public places without triggering their defenses. What victims couldn't see was that Bundy had customized his Beetle to function as a mobile abduction cell. One of the most significant modifications was the removal of the front passenger seat. This was sometimes done entirely, or the seat was rigged to be easily removed or laid flat. This alteration served multiple purposes. It made it harder for a victim to resist or escape once inside. It allowed him to quickly conceal a victim from outside view, and it provided more space to incapacitate them. Furthermore, Bundy reportedly tampered with the interior passenger side door handle, rendering it inoperable, effectively trapping anyone he managed to lure inside. He was also known to have removed or disabled other components that might aid in escape. This modified vehicle played a central role in his modus operandi. After using one of his various ruses, feigning injury, impersonating an authority figure to persuade a victim to accompany him to his car, the Beetle became the instrument of their abduction. Once inside, victims found themselves in a compromised and controlled environment. The car was used to transport them to secondary locations where he would commit the assaults and murders. The tan Volkswagen Beetle also became a key piece of evidence that eventually led to his initial downfall. After Carol Duranche's harrowing escape from Bundy in Utah in November 1974, where he impersonated a police officer and attempted to handcuff her in his VW, she was able to provide a description of him in his car. Later, in August 1975, Bundy was pulled over by a Utah highway patrolman for suspicious behavior. A search of his Beetle revealed a collection of incriminating items often associated with burglary or abduction, including a ski mask, a crowbar, rope, and handcuffs. Although he initially sold this specific car after being on the authorities' radar, it was later seized and meticulously examined. Forensic evidence found within the vehicle, such as hairs matching some of his victims, including Corinne Campbell, murdered in Colorado, became critical in linking him to various crimes and securing his initial convictions. The car, now a museum artifact, remains a chilling symbol of Bundy's calculated predation. Once Ted Bundy had successfully lured a victim and subdued them, often through a sudden, violent attack with a blunt instrument like a crowbar after they were near or inside his vehicle, a horrifying sequence of events would unfold. His crimes were not quick or impulsive acts of violence. They were calculated, prolonged, and marked by an extreme level of sadism aimed at exerting absolute power and control over his victims. After the initial abduction, Bundy would transport his victims, often across significant distances and sometimes over state lines, to pre-selected, secluded locations. These locations were typically remote, wooded areas where the risk of discovery was minimal. During their captivity, which could last for hours or even days, victims were subjected to brutal physical and sexual assaults. While Bundy was often reticent to discuss the specific details of these assaults, particularly the sexual aspects, even in his final confessions, the evidence found on the remains of some victims and his own oblique admissions painted a grim picture. The violence was not merely a means to an end murder, but appeared to be a core component of his psychological gratification. He derived pleasure from the terror, suffering, and complete domination of his victims. The methods of murder varied, but commonly included bludgeoning with a heavy object or strangulation. Sometimes both. He was meticulous in his efforts to control every aspect of his victims' final moments. The brutality of these acts revealed the profound psychopathy hidden beneath Bundy's charming and intelligent facade. His ability to compartmentalize his life, appearing as a normal, functioning member of society while secretly engaging in such depraved behavior, is a hallmark of highly manipulative and dangerous offenders. The terror and suffering he inflicted were immense, and the sequence of his crimes, from deceptive luring to violent abduction, sexual torture, murder, and often post-mortem mutilation or necrophilia, demonstrated a deeply disturbed and sadistic mind. These acts were not driven by a momentary loss of control, but were part of a repetitive, ritualistic pattern that fulfilled his dark, violent fantasies and his need for ultimate power over others. Ted Bundy's depravity extended beyond the act of murder into disturbing post-mortem behaviors, including necrophilia and the macabre practice of keeping trophies. These aspects of his crimes underscore the extreme nature of his psychopathology and his obsessive need for control and possession over his victims, even after their deaths. His methods of disposing of his victims' bodies were typically calculated to avoid detection, often involving transport to remote, wooded, or mountainous areas, sometimes far from the abduction site. This made discovery difficult and allowed decomposition to obscure evidence. A particularly chilling aspect of Bundy's pathology was his admission of revisiting the grave sites of his victims. He would sometimes spend hours or even days with the corpses, engaging in sexual acts, necrophilia, and grooming them, such as washing their hair or applying makeup. These rituals allowed him to prolong his perverse sense of possession and control, replaying his violent fantasies. This behavior continued until the bodies were too decomposed or had been disturbed by wild animals, at which point he might move them or simply cease his visits. In his final confessions, Bundy also admitted to decapitating at least 4 of his victims and keeping their heads as mementos or trophies for a period, sometimes at his apartment or in his car. He reportedly engaged in further acts of necrophilia with these severed heads. This gruesome practice served to further dehumanize his victims and allowed him to maintain a tangible link to his crimes, extending his sense of power and ownership. The psychological motivations behind such acts are complex, but often relate to a profound lack of empathy, an extreme form of objectification of the victims, and a desire to immortalize his achievements in his own mind. These post-mortem activities, the disposal in remote locations, the revisitation of grave sites, the acts of necrophilia, and the taking of trophies highlight the depth of Bundy's sadistic and psychopathic nature. They demonstrate a complete detachment from normal human emotion and a profound obsession with power, control, and the violation of his victims, extending far beyond the act of killing itself. These behaviors are crucial in understanding the full spectrum of his criminality and why he remains such a disturbing figure in the study of serial homicide. Ted Bundy's reign of terror was not confined to a single city or region. Instead, he was a highly mobile serial killer whose confirmed crimes and suspected activities spanned at least 7 states across the United States, primarily between 1974 and 1978. This geographical range was a significant factor in his ability to evade capture for so long and presented enormous challenges for law enforcement in an era before sophisticated, centralized criminal databases and rapid interstate police cooperation. His murderous spree is generally considered to have begun in the Pacific Northwest. In 1974, a disturbing pattern of disappearances and murders of young women emerged in Washington state, particularly around Seattle and Olympia, and then extended into neighboring Oregon. Bundy was a student at the University of Washington and later worked in Olympia, providing him with a familiar hunting ground. By the fall of 1974, Bundy had relocated to Salt Lake City to attend law school at the University of Utah. Soon after his arrival, young women began disappearing in Utah under circumstances similar to those in the Pacific Northwest. His activities during this period also extended into Colorado and Idaho, where victims matching his preferred type were abducted and murdered. For example, Corinne Campbell was murdered in Snowmass, Colorado, in January 1975, and evidence later linked Bundy to her death. After his 2 escapes from custody in Colorado in 1977, Bundy made his way to Florida. In January 1978, he committed a series of brutal attacks in Tallahassee, including the murders at the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University, followed by the abduction and murder of 12-year-old Kimberly Leach in Lake City a few weeks later. This extensive mobility was a key element of his criminal career. Bundy was adept at blending into new environments, using his intelligence and charm to navigate different locales. For investigators in the 1970s, linking a series of similar disappearances and murders across multiple state lines was a formidable task. Law enforcement agencies often operated in relative isolation, and the systems for sharing information about transient offenders were far less developed than they are today. Bundy exploited these systemic weaknesses, effectively becoming a traveling serial killer who could strike in one region and then move on, leaving bewildered local authorities struggling to connect the dots. This multi-state killing spree significantly complicated the investigation and allowed Bundy to continue his crimes for a devastatingly long period. A striking pattern in Ted Bundy's reign of terror was his apparent selection of victims who shared remarkably similar physical characteristics. The vast majority of the women he abducted, assaulted, and murdered were young, typically Caucasian, and often college students or in their early 20s. Beyond their age and educational status, many of Bundy's victims exhibited a consistent physical type. They were attractive, slender, and, most notably, had long, dark hair that was often parted in the middle. This distinct preference was so noticeable that it eventually became a key factor for investigators attempting to link disappearances across different states and in profiling the then unknown assailant. The psychological reasons behind this specific victim typology have been the subject of much speculation and analysis. One of the most prominent theories, supported by some biographers and criminologists, suggests that Bundy's ideal victim resembled Stephanie Brooks, often referred to by the pseudonym Diane Edwards in some accounts, a sophisticated and wealthy young woman from California whom Bundy had dated during his college years at the University of Washington. Brooks had ended their relationship, reportedly due to Bundy's perceived immaturity and lack of ambition at the time. This rejection is thought to have deeply wounded Bundy's narcissistic ego. According to this theory, his subsequent targeting of women who looked like Brooks was a form of symbolic revenge or an attempt to reassert control and dominance over a figure who represented this profound personal slight. By selecting, overpowering, and ultimately destroying these women, he was, in a twisted way, replaying and winning the scenario that had caused him such narcissistic injury. While Bundy himself, in some interviews, denied specifically targeting women who looked like his ex-girlfriend, the physical similarities among many of his victims are difficult to dismiss as mere coincidence. This victim profile, young, intelligent, attractive women with long, dark hair, represented a demographic that was also highly visible and potentially vulnerable on college campuses and in public spaces during the 1970s. His ability to identify and isolate these women, often by exploiting their compassion or trust, was a hallmark of his predatory skill. Although he did deviate from this type on occasion, particularly in his later crimes in Florida, such as the murder of 12-year-old Kimberly Leach, the prevalence of this specific appearance among his victims across multiple states remains a significant and haunting aspect of his criminal signature. The investigation into Ted Bundy's extensive crime spree was fraught with numerous and significant difficulties, which allowed him to evade definitive capture and continue his murderous activities for a disturbingly long period. These challenges stemmed from a combination of Bundy's own cunning, the limitations of law enforcement and forensic science in the 1970s, and the very nature of his crimes. One of the primary obstacles was Bundy's intelligence, charisma, and ability to project an image of normalcy. He was not a stereotypical monster in appearance or demeanor, which often disarmed potential witnesses and even, at times, law enforcement officials. His mask of sanity made it difficult for people to suspect him of the heinous acts he was committing. This was compounded by his cunning in planning his crimes, his careful selection of victims, and his efforts to eliminate evidence. He often chose remote dump sites for his victims' bodies, making their discovery difficult and decomposition more likely to destroy crucial forensic evidence. Bundy's mobility was another major factor. He committed crimes across multiple states, a pattern that was harder for law enforcement to recognize and connect in an era before sophisticated national databases like VICAP, Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, or widespread use of computerized information sharing between jurisdictions. Police departments often worked in silos, And a series of missing persons reports or murders in one state might not be immediately linked to similar incidents in another. Bundy exploited these jurisdictional boundaries and the lack of coordinated interstate investigation efforts. Furthermore, the forensic technology of the 1970s was far less advanced than it is today. DNA analysis, a cornerstone of modern homicide investigation, was not yet available. While fingerprinting and other forensic techniques existed, their application and the ability to link them across disparate crime scenes were more limited. The sheer volume of cases, many young women disappearing across several states, also created an overwhelming amount of information for investigators to process, making it challenging to discern patterns or identify a single perpetrator responsible for crimes in different regions. Initial skepticism among some law enforcement agencies about the possibility of a single individual committing such a wide-ranging series of abductions and murders also played a role in delaying a unified investigative approach. All these factors combined to create a perfect storm that allowed Bundy to operate under the radar for years. Ted Bundy's carefully constructed facade of normalcy began to unravel with his first significant arrest on August 16, 1975, in Granger, Utah, a suburb of Salt Lake City. The arrest itself was not initially for murder, but resulted from astute police work by Utah Highway Patrol Sergeant Bob Hayward. In the early morning hours, Sergeant Hayward observed Bundy's tan Volkswagen Beetle cruising suspiciously through a residential neighborhood and then attempting to flee when Hayward signaled him to stop. After a short pursuit, Bundy was pulled over. A search of Bundy's vehicle revealed a collection of highly suspicious items that would later be referred to as his burglar kit or murder kit. These included a ski mask, a crowbar, rope, handcuffs, an ice pick, and strips of cloth. While Bundy attempted to explain these items away, their presence, combined with his evasive behavior, was enough to arrest him for possession of burglary tools and evading an officer. This arrest was a pivotal moment, as it placed Bundy on law enforcement's radar in a tangible way and provided investigators with physical evidence. Crucially, this arrest soon linked Bundy to a more serious crime, the attempted kidnapping of Carol Daranch in nearby Murray, Utah, in November 1974. Daranch, who had bravely fought off and escaped from a man impersonating a police officer, Bundy, who had handcuffed her in his Volkswagen, was able to identify Bundy in a police lineup. The details of her abduction attempt, including the use of handcuffs and the description of the perpetrator and his car, matched the evidence found during Bundy's August 1975 arrest. Based on Daranch's compelling testimony and identification, Ted Bundy was charged with aggravated kidnapping and attempted criminal assault. His trial for the Daranch kidnapping took place in February and March 1976 in Salt Lake City. Despite Bundy's confident demeanor and attempts to discredit Daranch, the evidence was strong enough for a conviction. On March 1, 1976, Judge Stuart Hansen Jr. found Bundy guilty of aggravated kidnapping and sentenced him to 1 to 15 years in the Utah State Prison. This conviction was the first major legal blow against Bundy, stripping away his veneer of respectability and marking the beginning of the end of his murderous spree, although his most infamous crimes and escapes were yet to come. It also provided investigators in other states who were looking into a string of unsolved murders of young women, with a prime suspect now in custody. After his conviction in Utah for the kidnapping of Carol Daranch, Ted Bundy was extradited to Aspen, Colorado, in early 1977 to face murder charges for the 1975 death of Corinne Campbell, a young nurse killed in Snowmass. It was during his time in Colorado that Bundy orchestrated 2 daring and highly publicized escapes, further cementing his notoriety and demonstrating his cunning and desperate determination to evade justice. The first escape occurred on June 7, 1977, from the Pitkin County Courthouse in Aspen. Bundy, who had opted to act as his own attorney, a move that granted him more privileges and less direct supervision, was permitted to use the courthouse's second-floor law library to prepare for his trial. During a recess, while unguarded and unshackled, he seized an opportunity. jumped out of an open library window, and fled into the surrounding town and mountains. This audacious escape triggered a massive manhunt. Bundy remained at large for 6 days, surviving by breaking into a remote cabin before eventually being recaptured in Aspen while driving a stolen car. This escape, though short-lived, humiliated law enforcement and highlighted Bundy's resourcefulness. Following his recapture, Bundy was moved to what was considered a more secure facility, the Garfield County Jail in Glenwood Springs, Colorado. However, he immediately began planning a second, more elaborate escape. Over several months, he meticulously worked at his plan. He acquired a hacksaw blade possibly smuggled in by visitors and began sawing a hole in the metal ceiling of his cell, often camouflaging his work with noise from the radio or during times when guard presence was minimal. Crucially, he also began to significantly lose weight, reportedly dropping over 30 pounds, to ensure he could fit through the narrow opening he was creating. On the night of December 30th, 1977, with many jail staff on Christmas holiday leave, Bundy put his plan into action. He squeezed through the hole in his ceiling, navigated through the crawl space above the cells, and made his way into an unoccupied apartment within the jail building, which belonged to one of the jailers who was away for the holidays. There, he changed into civilian clothes he found in the apartment and simply walked out the front door of the jail. His escape was not discovered for some 15 to 17 hours, giving him a substantial head start. This time, Bundy successfully fled Colorado, making his way across the country via bus, train, and plane, eventually arriving in Tallahassee, Florida, in early January 1978, where he would unleash his final, horrifying wave of violence. These two escapes not only showcased Bundy's intelligence and audacity, but also exposed vulnerabilities in the correctional system and allowed a dangerous predator to roam free once more. After his second escape from a Colorado jail on December 30th, 1977, Ted Bundy made his way to Tallahassee, Florida, arriving in early January 1978. It was here, in a desperate and increasingly reckless state, that he unleashed his final and arguably most frenzied wave of violence. This period marked a shift in his modus operandi. While still targeting young women, his approach became more brazen and overtly aggressive, lacking some of the patient cunning that characterized his earlier crimes. The most notorious of these attacks occurred in the early morning hours of January 15, 1978, at the Chi Omega sorority house on the Florida State University FSU campus. Bundy broke into the house and, in a savage rampage lasting less than 15 minutes, brutally attacked 4 residents. He bludgeoned and strangled Margaret Bowman, 21, and Lisa Levy, 20, to death. Lisa Levy was also sexually assaulted with a hairspray bottle, and a bite mark left on her body would later become crucial forensic evidence. 2 other women in the house, Kathy Kleiner and Karen Chandler, were severely beaten but survived their injuries. That same night, after leaving the Chi Omega house, Bundy broke into another nearby apartment and attacked Cheryl Thomas, another FSU student, who also survived but suffered serious injuries, including a broken jaw and permanent hearing loss. The weapon used in these attacks was reportedly a heavy piece of oak firewood. Less than a month later, on February 9, 1978, Bundy committed his final known murder. He abducted 12-year-old Kimberly Diane Leach from her junior high school in Lake City, Florida, some 150 miles from Tallahassee. This crime was particularly shocking due to the victim's young age, a deviation from his more common targeting of college-aged women. Leach's partially decomposed body was found nearly 2 months later in a remote wooded area under a hog shed near the Suwannee River. These Florida attacks, especially the Chi Omega rampage, were characterized by an explosive, almost uncontrolled violence. Unlike many of his previous crimes where he lured victims one by one, the sorority house attack was a blitz assault on multiple individuals in a single location. This frenzied spree spread terror across Florida and intensified the manhunt for the unknown assailant. It was Bundy's increasingly erratic behavior and his theft of a Volkswagen Beetle in Tallahassee that ultimately led to his final arrest in Pensacola, Florida, on February 15, 1978, bringing his murderous cross-country journey to an end. Ted Bundy's murderous rampage finally came to an end, with his last arrest on February 15, 1978, in Pensacola, Florida. The circumstances of his capture were somewhat less dramatic than his infamous escapes, but crucial in bringing him to justice for his most recent and brutal crimes. Pensacola police officer David Lee stopped Bundy in the early hours of the morning because the orange Volkswagen Beetle he was driving was identified as stolen. After an initial attempt to give a false name, Bundy was eventually identified. And authorities quickly began to link him to the recent Chi Omega sorority house attacks in Tallahassee and the disappearance of Kimberly Leach. This final arrest led to 2 major trials in Florida, which were media sensations, partly due to Bundy's own courtroom behavior and the horrific nature of the crimes. The first trial, held in Miami in the summer of 1979, was for the Chi Omega sorority house murders and attacks. Bundy, at times, participated in his own defense, exhibiting a bizarre mix of arrogance and charm. Key evidence included eyewitness testimony from Nita Neary, a Chi Omega resident who saw him leaving the house, and, most damningly, forensic odontology. Bite marks left on the body of victim Lisa Levy were conclusively matched to Bundy's distinctive, crooked teeth. On July 24, 1979, the jury found Bundy guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder for Lisa Levy and Margaret Bowman, 3 counts of attempted first-degree murder, and 2 counts of burglary. He was subsequently sentenced to death twice for the murders. The second major Florida trial took place in Orlando in early 1980 for the kidnapping and first-degree murder of 12-year-old Kimberly Leach. The evidence in this case included fibers found in Bundy's stolen van that matched Kimberly's clothing, and eyewitness testimony placing a man resembling Bundy with a girl matching Kimberly's description near her school on the day she disappeared. During this trial, in a notorious courtroom spectacle, Bundy married Carol Ann Boone, a former colleague who testified as a character witness, by taking advantage of an obscure Florida law that considered a declaration in open court before a judge as a legal marriage. Despite these theatrics, on February 7, 1980, Bundy was found guilty. He received his 3rd death sentence for the murder of Kimberly Leach. These 3 death sentences in Florida marked the definitive legal end to Ted Bundy's reign of terror. Although he would spend years on death row appealing his sentences, these convictions ensured that he would never again be free to harm others. For many years after his arrests and convictions, Ted Bundy steadfastly maintained his innocence, denying any involvement in the numerous murders and disappearances he was suspected of. However, as his execution date in Florida drew nearer and all legal appeals were exhausted, his stance began to shift. In the final days leading up to his execution on January 24, 1989, Bundy started to confess to some of his crimes, engaging in a series of interviews with investigators, psychologists, and journalists. These last-minute confessions were widely seen as a desperate attempt to gain a stay of execution, to exert final control, or perhaps, as some argued, to unburden himself to a degree, though the sincerity of the latter is highly debated. Bundy confessed to committing at least 30 homicides across 7 states: Washington, Oregon, Utah, Idaho, Colorado, California, 1 victim, and Florida, between 1974 and 1978. Key figures to whom he provided these confessions included FBI Special Agent Bill Hagmaier, who conducted extensive interviews with him, Detective Robert Keppel, who had investigated Bundy in Washington state and later wrote The Riverman, based on Bundy's insights into serial killing, offered in exchange for discussing other cases, and Dr. James Dobson, a prominent evangelical Christian figure. He also spoke with authors Stephen Michaud and Hugh Ainsworth, whose interviews formed the basis of Ted Bundy Conversations with a Killer. While the official confessed number stands at 30, many investigators and researchers firmly believe that Bundy's true victim count is significantly higher, potentially ranging from 36 to over 100. This belief is based on several factors. Gaps in his timeline. There were periods where Bundy's whereabouts were unaccounted for, and unsolved murders fitting his victim type occurred in areas he was known to frequent. vague confessions. For some of the confessed murders, especially those outside Florida for which he was not being tried, his details were sometimes vague or incomplete, making it difficult for investigators to definitively link him to all the specific cases he claimed. His manipulative nature, Bundy was a master manipulator, and some believe he may have exaggerated or downplayed numbers at different times to suit his own purposes, such as appearing more prolific or controlling the narrative. Early potential crimes. There is ongoing speculation that Bundy may have begun killing earlier than 1974, possibly even in his adolescence, though he never confessed to this. The confessions provided some closure for a few families, as Bundy sometimes offered details about where he had disposed of remains. However, for many other missing women suspected to be his victims, their fates remain unconfirmed by his own admission. The exact number of people Ted Bundy murdered will likely never be known, leaving a painful ambiguity for many affected families and a chilling testament to the full, unquantifiable extent of his predatory reign. After years of appeals that navigated the complexities of the American legal system, Theodore Ted Bundy's extensive criminal career reached its definitive end on January 24, 1989. At the age of 42, he was executed in the electric chair, nicknamed Old Sparky, at the Florida State Prison in Rayford. His execution brought a close to one of the most sensational and horrifying chapters in modern crime history. But his legacy continues to cast a long, dark shadow. The public reaction to Bundy's execution was notable. Crowds gathered outside the prison, with many openly celebrating his death, some setting off fireworks and holding signs with messages like "Burn, Bundy, burn." This macabre spectacle reflected the profound public revulsion and fear he had instilled, as well as a societal desire for retribution for his heinous crimes. For the families of his many victims, the execution brought a measure of justice and perhaps some degree of closure, though the pain of their losses remained. The Bundy case left an indelible mark on several fields. In criminology and psychology, Bundy became a prominent and disturbing case study in psychopathy, narcissism, and sexual sadism. His ability to maintain a charming facade while committing brutal acts challenged existing notions of what a serial killer looked like and forced a deeper examination of the mask of sanity. His seemingly normal background and intelligence made his crimes all the more perplexing and terrifying, prompting extensive research into the developmental pathways and motivations of such offenders. Law enforcement practices were also significantly impacted. Bundy's ability to commit crimes across multiple states highlighted critical deficiencies in interstate police cooperation and information sharing during the 1970s. His case underscored the need for centralized databases for violent crimes and missing persons, contributing to the development of resources like the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, VICAP. It also emphasized the importance of behavioral science and criminal profiling in tracking and identifying mobile, organized serial offenders. Furthermore, Ted Bundy's crimes and highly publicized trials had a lasting effect on public awareness. He became a boogeyman figure, a stark reminder of stranger danger and the terrifying reality that predators could be intelligent, articulate, and seemingly ordinary individuals. His story fueled the burgeoning true crime genre, spawning countless books, documentaries, and films that continue to dissect his life and crimes, ensuring that his haunting legacy and the lessons learned from his reign of terror would not be forgotten. The story of Ted Bundy is a chilling exploration of the darkest corners of the human psyche. His ability to wear a mask of normalcy while committing such unspeakable acts serves as a horrifying reminder that evil can indeed possess a charming face. He preyed on innocence and kindness, leaving a devastating legacy of stolen lives and shattered families across America. While his execution brought a form of justice, the questions and the horror surrounding his crimes continue to resonate, forcing us to confront the reality of predators who walk among us. Bundy's case forever changed the way law enforcement profiles and pursues serial offenders, and it undeniably heightened public awareness of the dangers that can lie hidden beneath a polished surface. The victims of Ted Bundy must never be forgotten, their lives tragically cut short by a man whose name is now synonymous with calculated, sadistic evil. Thank you for joining me, David, on Crime Line as we examine this disturbing case. We appreciate your time and hope these stories, though dark,